Hey everyone, it's Justin Adkins, and I'm so excited to be on the Scrapbook.com YouTube channel today for World Card Making Week with a super sunny hello card to share with you. I wanted to create a collage of stamps, so I'm pulling in the Nestage Stitch Stamps shape dies, and I'm going to be using a lot of the designs in this for my card. I'm pulling in the Sunkissed pattern paper collection, and I didn't really want to make my card super beachy and super summery, so I am just pulling in the patterns that are included with this pack that are sort of neutral. So I've got a wavy colorful design, we've got a solid purple, a blue polka dot, we've got a coral color, and we've got a sort of yellow hatch pattern as well. So these are going to be the colors that I'm going to be focusing on for the card. Now for my postage stamp die cuts, I'm going to use the heavyweight white mixed media paper pad. This is the 6x8 size because I am going to nest the dies onto the paper to try and maximize the amount of space that I'm going to be using, so I'm not really wasting that much paper. So I am pulling in all of the dies except the largest in this set, and I'm nesting them inside of each other onto that mixed media white paper. So I've got all four of them all lined up, and then what I will do is pull in a piece of mint tape, so I will just put everything nicely in place. I'll use my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cutting machine to die cut each of these shapes out, and I'm actually going to process the shapes twice through, so I'm going to have doubles of all the die cuts. Here you see me laying out each of the die cuts. I am going to have 8 of them total. I'm only going to be using 7 though for the card. Now what I'm going to do is map out the size of the inside of the stamp so it still has a white border. So for my largest, I have 2 3/4 by 3 3/4 is what I'm measuring out on my glass mat. So using those measurements, I am going to grab the yellow crosshatch pattern paper, and I am going to cut paper matching that 2 3/4 by 3 3/4 size. Here you're going to see I can lay that largest outline on top, and it fits really nicely. For the second largest stamp, and I know it says stamp, but even though it's a die cut, but it is a postage stamp, it is 2 inches by 2 3/4 inches. I'm going to need 2 of these, so I'm going to go ahead and cut a 2-inch piece of the coral paper, and then I am going to cut it at the 2 3/4 line, so I'm going to have 2 of them fitting really nicely into the second largest stamp die cut. For the second smallest of the stamps, the size that I'm going to need is 1 1/4 by 1 3/4, and this is going to give me that really nice size that's going to fit inside of those die cuts. So I have gone ahead and I've taken the purple paper that I've grabbed from the Sunkissed pattern paper collection, and I'm cutting the paper to that size. Lastly, for the smallest die cut of the stamp, I'm going to do it. It is 7/8 of an inch by 1 1/8 of an inch that I'm going to need to adhere for this stamp. I know that those sizes, you're not really going to find the tick marks on your guillotine trimmer like I'm using right here. So I'm just kind of going in between the tick marks to try and get that size appropriately. So I'm cutting my little backing pieces into place, and then these are going to be really nice and cute to put inside of those smallest stamp die cuts. Now, of course, we've got to do a little bit of ink blending, so I'm going to use the Daisy stencil by Scrapbook.com with the largest yellow crosshatch pattern paper that I had cut. What I do for my ink blending is I take my panel, I put it on the back of the stencil, and then use 2 pieces of mint tape to tack the paper onto the stencil. Because this stencil isn't super delicate, I feel the tape is going to do a perfect job, so I'm going to use some of that Glitz ink by Catherine Pooler on top of the stencil to just blend out that fun daisy pattern. I love using flowers like a daisy stencil for a greeting card because I really think it brings a nice cheerful sense to the card. I mean, who doesn't like seeing some nice bright flowers on a card, especially one that says hello? So we're going to go ahead and ink blend that all out, and then I'm going to use some of the residual Glitz ink that's on my glass mat to go ahead and distress the edges of this panel. And this is just going to make the edges of the panel a little bit darker than the center and give a nice variation of color. So I've got that situated for those panels. Now I want to move on to the coral panels. So I'm going to be using the string lights stencil, and using that same method, I am going to use some mint tape so I can tack these panels onto the back of the stencil and hold them nicely in place. If you haven't grabbed some mint tape to add to your stash, I highly recommend doing so because it really comes in handy with stencil use. I pull in some Coral Cabana ink by Catherine Pooler. Being transparent, for some reason, this ink pad, it looked like it was nice and juicy, but the ink didn't transfer super well to my blending brush, so I've got to go in a little bit extra just to get that Coral Cabana ink to transfer. The end result looks great. I love how it turned out. This bit just took a little bit more of extra effort to get turned out, but I really like how this Coral Cabana ink color sits on top of this coral paper. It's nice and dark. I like that it's got a little bit more pink to it than orange, and it really just adds more sunny cheerfulness to the colors that we're going to be using for this card. Taking the blending brush and some of the residual ink, I do go and blend the edges just like the previous panel so I get a nice distressed edge, and it's going to give me a really nice variation of color on these two little panels for the stamp die cuts. I also think that this string light stencil just gives a really fun pattern. I would love to use it with some sort of a glitz gel or a paste of sorts because I think that this sort of pattern lends itself really nicely to that. Lastly, we're going to pull in this stars stencil by Scrapbook.com. I am a huge sucker when it comes to stars as a shape, so I knew I wanted to incorporate this stencil into this card. I'm tacking down the purple rectangles that we cut out, and then I'm going to use some pixie dust ink by Catherine Pooler over the stencil to get that nice transfer of ink and have those really awesome purple stars. So I will blend this nicely. I love how the pixie dust color sits on top of this purple ink that we're using, so it's going to work really nicely with all the colors. I'm also using those blending brushes once again with some of the residual ink to get nice distressed edges to each of my rectangles. This gives, like I said, that nice variation of color. You're going to hear that so many times, but this might be the last one. But we've got all the nice blending in for this, and I just love how this turns out. I love those little stars. I think they're going to add a really fun element to this card. Last, for the littlest stamp, I'm pulling in the Sunny Lane stamp set. This 6x8 stamp set, or roughly in size, I'm going to use the largest heart on the stamp, the solid heart, and we are going to stamp out this heart onto these little polka dot rectangles in All That Jazz ink. So I have gone ahead, I'm going to ink up my stamp with the Catherine Pooler All That Jazz ink, and then just get nice little hearts on top of it. I was originally going to use both the big and the little heart in this set, but it just didn't work out the way I wanted. Now, of course, I wanted to add a little bit of glitz to the card, so I've used some liquid snowflake white paper splatter by Picket Fence Studio, which I'm going to water down and then splatter on top of all of the panels that we ink blended. These are going to add some really nice white glittery specks to these panels, and I just really think that this amps up the card. It's one of those finishing touches that makes it look like you really put some time into thinking what you wanted to do with this, and who doesn't like a little bit of extra sparkle? Now, I am going to trim down the main panel of the card, which is this wavy, colorful pattern. Because we're making it a 7 size card, which standard is 5x7, I'm trimming this panel so that is 4 7/8 by 6 7/8. This is going to allow me to get a really nice thin white border when I adhere this panel on top of my white card base. After I have my panel all trimmed, I'm using some residual snowflake white paper splatter, and I'm just going to splatter this panel as well. Carry on that sparkle. You can never have too much of it, and don't let your precious paper splatter go to waste. So after I have everything all nice and splattered, I do set my panel aside to dry, and it'll be ready in a minute when we need to use it for future card making. I'm pulling in the Thank You Sentiments 3 word die set, and I wanted the main sentiment for my card to just say, hello, you. And we are going to use the word die cuts and the outlines for each of those letters. I'm taking that coral paper and distressing the edges with that Coral Cabana ink once again. I guess you're going to hear me say variation of color one last time. I thought we were done, but I'm blending the edge of that Coral Cabana. Of course, you can tell I did speed everything up, so I apologize for my hand moving so fast. I'm tacking down my Hello and You die cuts with mint tape, and then we will process them through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cutting machine. After I have my words all die cut out, I pull in some smooth vellum by Scrapbook.com, and I am going to use this for the outline piece for each of my word die cuts. I love using vellum for my cards, especially when it comes to the outline of a word die cut, because it doesn't let you lose all of the wonderful colors that it's going to be covering. It mutes them a little, but it still lets them peek through. So I do die cut these as well from my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cutting machine, and they cut like butter. Vellum is a nice thin paper, so I love how it turns out. Using my Misty Precision Glue Press, I go and I adhere each of my words onto the outline vellum pieces. I also like to incorporate the use of acrylic blocks to add a little bit of extra pressure so that my die cut and my vellum layers adhere very nicely. So we've got that all taken care of. I'm going to assemble my stamps right now. Now, because I do have 7 of them to put together, I'm just going to show you 3 just to kind of get a gist of how I'm doing it. So I do add the glue to the back of the white frame, very close to the inner edge, and then I take the panels that we ink blended and I adhere it to the back. Here you're going to see me do the very last one, which is the small little blue heart. And after this one, all 7 of my stamps will be ready to go. I like to map out where I want to put my die cut words. So I'm sort of just spacing out where I want to put the hello and the U onto the main stamp for my card. With vellum, I just add it to the back of the areas where the word die cut will cover, because if you add liquid adhesive to the back of exposed vellum, it shows wet marks on it, and you don't really want that. So I try to add it into areas where I can disguise it and you won't see it peek through. So I use my acrylic block, I press everything into place, and now I want to use my time to go ahead and map out where I want each of my stamps. So after I get everything into place, I begin the process of putting each of the stamps down with liquid adhesive until I get to my last largest one. I am playing around with the space and the overlapping of all of these stamps because I really want this to look almost like a messy collage of all the stamps that I've collected. And I really love how all of these colors are playing so nicely with each other. That's kind of the beauty of working with a pattern paper collection, is they're all meant to coordinate together. You can just use one, you can grab 5 and have them all work together. So for the largest postage die, now that I've got all of the other pretty patterns into place, I'm going to use some pre-cut foam strips by Scrapbook.com because I want this stamp to really sort of stick out. I'm going to add a little bit of extra dimension to it so it pops out on the card and it really allows the recipient to see that hello you as the very first element. It's just kind of grabbing that attention. So I place it really nicely, offset the center so it's kind of on the left side of the card. Here you can see I'm fidgeting a little bit with where I want it. But now that I've got it nicely placed, we just have to do a couple more steps before our card is completed. Using liquid adhesive, I do adhere my card panel to an A7 sized card base. Now remember, A7 is a little bigger than standard size. It's a 5-inch by 7-inch card base, and it really packs a punch. It's a nice size card to send to a friend. And I pull in some white glitter enamel dots by Pink and Main. Pink and Main has some of my favorite enamel dots that are on the market. They've got so many fun color combinations, especially their white and their clear glitter packs. I just think they're fantastic. So I end up putting a lot of enamel dots onto this card. Because of the size of the card, I totally just decide to put 11 of them right on it. So with that 11th dot nicely into place, my card is fully completed. Thank you all so very much for stopping by and crafting along with me today on the Scrapbook.com YouTube channel. Don't forget to take a moment to like and subscribe, and you can also follow me on social media at JustinNoteByJustin on both Instagram and YouTube. And lastly, always remember that for the best selection, free inspiration, and fastest shipping, Scrapbook.com's got you covered. Thanks again for stopping by, and have a great day.